Guys, Dr. Tom here, and welcome back to the Healing from Lyme Disease Summit. And I'm really pumped for today's conversation, my interview with Dr. Kent Holtorf. As you know, I really love to, bring on people who are leaders in the field. Dr. Holtorf is the medical director of the Holtorf Medical Group, and his bio is so long and so many accolades. One of the things that really made me want to bring him here today is that he is the founder of Integrated Peptides, which actually helps us bring evidence-based peptides to patients with chronic illness, chronic Lyme, and in an oral form where we're not having to inject ourselves all the time, and also can share a lot of knowledge about what injectables may be helpful. But even maybe more important than that, when Kent and I first met, we started a conversation, and I think the first thing he said is, other than, "Hey, Tom, how are you?" is, "What's your best Lyme protocol?" And then we had this great conversation. And what really happened was, I realized in the first moment that we met that he was always digging deeper. He was always saying, we're here, we need to go further. And the reason we need to go further is because people are still suffering. And when I meet people like that, I want to have more conversations with them, because I felt like at the time, I'm like a newer kid on the block, and yeah, I'd done a bunch, but I looked up and I saw Kent as someone who's been here and a leader in the field for so long, so humble, wanting to find out how he can help you and all of his patients better. So Dr. Kent Holtorf, thanks for joining us. And thanks for being such an inspiration to me and so many people in the field.
Oh my God. Thank you for the over. So thank you. Very nice of you for the kind words. But no, I came up to you. I was nervous. I don't get nervous around a doctor. But dude, man, you are the biggest brain in the room all the time, wherever you go. So I was like, oh, should I talk to him? Should I talk to him? Celebrity. So yeah, I just love your work, and your webinars and your lectures are just you're tenfold above everyone else. So I am very appreciative, grateful, and humbled by being here. So thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, it's so interesting. It's a funny place where we're starting off, because I feel like so many of our patients are comparing themselves to other people, when most of us are all going through the same thing. I'm like, oh my God, this Kent Holtorf, man, I didn't even think I'd ever get a chance to talk to this guy. And then he's asking me questions. But that's what is so cool about what we do. The people in our small little neck of the the woods, so to speak, in this field, all just are in it because they love science. They love helping people heal. And that's just to me, the most.
Can't be in it for the money. There's a lot of easier ways to make money.
For real.
One cancer doc says, "Why are you doing Lyme? Just do cancer. It's so much easier."
Right. Then you can have the infusion center and the this and the that. But so I'm excited because we're going to be talking about sort of accelerated immune system aging as this core dysfunction in chronic Lyme disease, in chronic inflammatory response syndrome. I usually just say CIRS, but try to always remember what it actually means.
I just almost finished an ebook, but I can never finish anything because I keep adding. But I'll shoot it over to you, and it's the what is it? The peptide protocol for the rapid treatment of CIRS. And so the standard CIRS treatment is, let's get rid of the toxins to help the immune system, right? But that's backward. Treat the immune system and you can detoxify so much quicker and get patients from A to B, instead of, I've had so many patients come in on binders. Binders are good, but it's like, I've been on for 4 years and I know I'm going to get better, shoemaker, and I'm like, well, it's been 4 years. I think we can cut that down, and get from A to B in months rather than years.
Yeah, I think it's critical. And as an osteopathic physician, I got into that profession because they said this crazy thing: support the self-healing mechanism. So essentially, find the issue, fix it, and get out of the way and let the body do the work. Find it, fix it, leave it alone. And that's what I love about the stuff that you talk about. So when we want to fix, when we want to help people recover more rapidly, from Lyme, from mold exposure and biotoxin illness, cancer, chronic illness in general, because there's so much overlap. The pandemic recently has shown us, wow, a lot of these crazy chronic Lyme docs actually know how to treat people with chronic immune dysregulation and dysfunction. So that none of them are like, oh, they're not even talking about chronic COVID. They're talking about immune dysfunction from it and from retained spike protein. So the question really is, how, where do we start to understand how, particularly let's focus on Lyme, but certainly go wherever you want to go because that's what you're here for. Because you are the you know what's going on in this field. So, but what's the scoop with Lyme disease? Why are we getting it so easily, and how does it screw up the immune system? So, and then how do we start to create a protocol that actually moves the needle forward rather than just doing the same thing with a different name for 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, and that's true. Like all these syndromes, like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, like fibromyalgia, if you press on 11, 18 tender points, oh, you're positive. So it's on signs, and there's nothing special about those tender points. It's like you want to ask someone who's fibromyalgia, it's like, do you have muscle pain and sleep disorder and post-exertion fatigue? Okay, you got fibromyalgia. And people are like, well, then how do you know if they get better? Ask them. And chronic fatigue syndrome is based on symptoms and you're fatigued and you can't sleep but the problem with these is that it gave the permission for doctors to basically do nothing. So I diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. Now I can just give you antidepressant. Like, do they ever look at the underlying cause? No. And you look at, for instance, studies with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome showed that basically 35% will have low natural killer cell number, but 75 to 80% will have low natural killer cell function. And that's where so if you look at the immune system, to break it down, everything's an oversimplification with the immune system because you have to, because it's just so, so many different arrows. But there's Th1 and Tregs generally on this side. And on this side, there's Th2, Th17, which is basically the Th1 gets stuff inside the cell, Th2 gets stuff outside the cell. But the Th17 very much causes autoimmunity. Then on this side, the Tregs, calm down from overreacting to things. Now, one thing that's interesting, you look at all the textbooks and still journals, we'll talk about this, that like Hashimoto's is a Th1 disorder, too high of Th1, and Graves is Th2. I'm like, with all these things like that, like lupus, all these things, like, well, why do they respond to the same treatment? And it doesn't make sense. And so what they found is that the Th17, they couldn't differentiate it from Th1, but they're on two different sides. So, and there's all these people saying, oh, Th1, if you look at cytokines, but no, because the problem, as we find, is that the body's trying to boost something. Let's say he's trying to boost the Th1, but it's not responding. So those will go really high and say, oh, it's a Th1, basically high disorder. No, it's low, but the body's trying to increase it. So it matters what you're testing, right? And so what we found, it's not really a Th1 marker, but the downstream effects of Th1, we found the best correlation is with natural killer cell function. And generally Quest is, I hate Quest, but they got the best test other than the specialty test. And then, and with the Th2 and will increase autoimmunity, inflammation. And if you look at, I'll come back to the thymus. So the thymus is in your breastbone. It starts involuting right around age 9, 10, 11. And it keeps involuting, basically shrinking by about age 40, 45. It's at its lowest point. And that's when we start getting all these diseases of aging, autoimmune disease, cancer, diabetes, osteoporosis, all these things. And if you look, all these things are associated with a dysfunctional immune system, low Th1, high Th2. And then there was like the TRIM trial, what they gave was metformin, growth hormone, and DHEA. And it showed to rejuvenate the thymus, and people got much better. And it was like an anti-aging thing. So all these things we're talking about Lyme also holds for this whole anti-aging movement, which I think is awesome because we can lower your biologic age. But it all goes, so you think of Lyme as really a rapid aging of the immune system and mitochondria and the pineal hypothalamic pituitary hormone, axis, immune activation of coagulation, and all these things. Sorry. One second. There we go. And it all fits together. And so when we started looking at the immune system, that the nice thing is it's the commonality among all these things, whether you have autoimmune disease, chronic Lyme, and we'll talk about chronic Lyme, how it directly causes that. And all these inflammatory diseases, cancer, they all have this immune dysfunction. And so people are doing stuff like, again, this like TRIM trial to rejuvenate the thymus, but why don't we just give thymic peptides? It's like if you're low testosterone, give testosterone. If you're low estrogen, give estrogen. If you're low in thymic peptides, give thymic peptides. You know?
It makes a ton of sense. And like, I really like the concept of this sort of rapid aging of the immune system triggered by one of these, infections, toxic exposures, specifically Lyme, because people, I always joke, like, a lot of times kids will respond in a different way than adults. And sometimes they can heal really quickly, but it's like, they're like a new car, and like, I'm a used jalopy type of thing, and it's like, I just think about it. I'm like, but why are all these people who are like 15, 30, 40, like looking like they're responding like they're, way like double their chronologic age? So what's that next? So when we have this, so with Lyme, we start to have this immune dysfunction triggered, right? Is what you're saying? And then
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think most people who had chronic Lyme didn't even know, right?
Mhm.
You just suppress it. And we have so many infections that you think like, oh, you got this, or people come up with like, 10 in positive for infections. Do you think you got 10 different infections? No, everyone has those. Your immune system just suppresses it. But as we're in this, modern age with toxins, pesticides, plastics, stress is a huge thing. And so we find that you have toxins and stress, and then you're going to be much more prone to a chronic infection that you would otherwise just totally suppress. And then the Lyme itself will basically, the tick saliva will suppress your Th1, and then the Lyme will actually also directly suppress Th1. Then it goes inside the cell now because the Th1 is low, and now you've got chronic Lyme. And it continues to suppress that Th1, increase Th2, which also goes with thymus involution, aging, chronic illness, and everything's a vicious cycle. So you get this immune dysfunction, which then causes, again, pineal, hypothalamic pituitary hormone dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction, immune activation, coagulation, leaky gut, and all these things are just, everything's a vicious cycle in a good way or a bad way.
Right. And I mean, I think before we hit the record button, we were talking about finding that root cause. And it's like, I think a lot of times we're saying, hey, the infection's the root cause, or the mold exposure, or the heavy metalism. What you're saying is like, go back further, and it's almost like, what's the part of the body that's actually busted or not working well? So it's like the Lyme may have broke something, the mold may have broke something. It may or may not still be causing the problems. You're really saying like, step back and see what immune dysregulation has been triggered, because that's the thing that should be clearing it.
And that we find, because all this vicious cycle with so many different components, and also brain and all these things, is that once this vicious cycle starts, now you say, well, what's the cause? Originally it was maybe Lyme, but also stress and toxins. And then now you get all this stuff. Now you get reactivating infections because your Th1 is so low, and that causes more immune dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction, and causes hypothalamic pituitary. Basically that gets low, so that causes more dysfunction, and you get immune activation, coagulation. Now hormones and medications and other things can't get in the cell, and waste products can't get out, and so it's like, well, what's the cause now? It's 20 things. So we found that if you fix the immune system, you're going to fix a lot of those things without having to treat everything. And a lot of times you have to do, certain treatment, like let's say, still cognitive dysfunction, and we'll give them cerebral lysis, cerebral pep. And also, but if we fix the immune system, a lot of these things just get better. Like the autoimmune disease goes away. Like how big is that? You know, you look at, I think all these Lyme patients generally have really PANS. And, you know, I just did a 3-hour visit, supposed to be a 30-minute visit, it was 3 hours with a new Lyme patient. Doesn't know she's Lyme, but she's going to be. Yeah, and she had so many different, you know, basically systems that were totally just screwed up, and she could not function at all. And she was a vet, went to the VA, and they're like, oh, no one could have this. It's all psychological, you know? And so I'm like, no. And we did a bunch of labs, and she could not believe, like, she's like, oh, what will be abnormal? Like, how many things are abnormal? And she said, all the doctor said, I'm fine. Well, because if you do a CBC, a chem panel, and a cholesterol, you're going to be fine. And a TSH, yeah, their TSH is not high, it's low, but they're low thyroid. But endocrinologists learn, you know, basically TSH is high, your thyroid's low, TSH is low, your thyroid's high. No, that's wrong, you know. And I wrote a couple review articles, a number of them, on that whole premise. The way we diagnose and treat thyroid dysfunction in this country is wrong. But
there's so much dogma about it, and like I kind of understand some of the background. I hesitate to say political or financial or anything like that, but that may have come to mind. But you know, it's almost like we get so far down one path that we just can't say, wait, I'm going to go back here and switch over to what Kent just was saying, you know. And it's an interesting thing. And I think that what we're seeing with Lyme, we're seeing with the pandemic, we're seeing with all these other things, and probably way before people recognize Lyme, the thyroid piece is, we need to be, this is the part, like when we first met, I was like, Kent is into learning, and he's okay if what he previously thought is now shown to be different. You know, I recently saw a comedian who my daughter and my wife and I watch once in a while because it's like almost family friendly. And so now these days, you know, the 11 through 13 is kind of like almost like when we were 25, and you know, but
yeah.
And he said, like, look, like there's stuff going on 10 years that I said 10 years ago that people want me to apologize for now. He's like, I'm not going to apologize for what I said 10 years ago because back then it was okay. But what I'm not going to do is today, I'm going to recognize that that's not okay anymore. And I'm going to do the other thing.
I love it. Like, yeah, people are crucifying people, this whole woke thing, you know, I don't want to get, but yeah, it's like, okay, I was wrong. And I told also patients, if they have a doctor that says, I don't know, stick with that doctor, you know, instead of bullshitting and go, oh, that's, you know, we'll send, you probably see this. If you have a patient that's been seeing a doctor for 10 years, you send them back better. You think the doctor's happy?
Oh, no,
they tell the patient, you're no longer a patient. You're, basically, if you keep seeing that crazy Dr. Tom, I won't no longer see you, you know. And like, just a quick little story that we had this patient, and she was family that owns all the movie theaters around, but she had this doctor she thought was her best friend, and she got hurdle cell cancer, right? The thyroid. And the doctor's like, you got to get this out this week. And so she called me, and I said, wait a minute, here, I'll send you some studies. This is an inflammatory cancer, you know, I think we can reverse it. And so I gave her all the studies. I said, you know, I'm not going to make it remind for you, but she told her doctor and her best friend, she thought that, okay, she's not going to do the treatment. She's going to try it for 6 months. He's like, you got a death wish, you know. And no, but she's a very logical, you know, person. And 6 months later, we do the scan, it's gone, right? So she goes back, she's so happy, and she's going to bring it back to her friend, her doctor, and think he's going to be happy. I'm like, I don't know, we'll see. If he's happy, that's different than most. But she goes back, and she reported back that he wouldn't come out of his office, and just told the front desk girl to say she's no longer a patient.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And like, I mean, I think that that's part of why we do summits like this, is to get that information out to people so that they can make their own decision, and to also introduce people to other doctors who are challenging the mainstream, not because we want to challenge it, and not because we don't believe in the stuff that works. It's we see the things that don't work and we want to find those new things.
It's so common. Or you probably see this now. I mean, medicine has deteriorated, standard medicine. And look, I was a very evidence-based, I'm still a very evidence-based physician, but it was ingrained to me that, oh my God, never go anything alternative, integrative. It means no, it's not evidence-based. And that was ingrained to me, and then but I got sick and I went to all these, chief of staff and this, and they couldn't help me at all. So I snuck off to some of these integrative, alternative, whatever you want to call it. And I'm like, holy crap, this is more evidence-based than what the rep would teach me in residency, right?
And look at Lyme disease, man. I mean, how are we treating people? We're using the best evidence we have and we're applying it to the unique individual in front of us. And when there's more evidence for the chronicity of Lyme disease than for the effective treatment of Lyme, the herbs that we know about, the meds, the everything, it was interesting too. I just want to wrap back to a quick point that you made earlier, because I want to remember to share it, is when you were saying like, it's like all the adults have PANS, and obviously PANS is a pediatric condition triggered by Lyme and other toxins and infections and whatever. But and I don't really feel like saying ands all day for adult acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome, but essentially like it all really does it revolutionized, Kent, the way that I treated patients when I realized that my adults had the same autoimmune issues. So it wasn't just the lupus and the rheumatoid people who had the autoimmune trigger. So much of the executive dysfunction, so much of the the cognitive stuff, the emotional piece, and even the physical stuff. It's very similar to what we see in the autoimmune encephalitis triggered by infections in kids. So one of the things I think that is really unique about the way you talk about things is like the use of immune modulators that are really natural, not like immune suppressors, but modulators such as peptides that really can kind of get down to that core abnormality in sort of the immune dysregulation. So I was hoping, as much as I want to talk about the state of medicine for the rest of the night, because we like talking, because we're on a mission. But this is, guys, this is like what you see when you get two doctors together who are so passionate about finding out the truth and challenging what we believe is the truth, but also what everyone else has told us the truth is, so that we can find out what the next best truth is. Because we have no articles on how to treat Babesia Duncani prior to like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Literally, we just knew one paper told us how it didn't work. So this is what's so critical. So anyway, now here I'm, tangenting again, but immune modulation and peptides, because this is really like a critical piece of healing from chronic Lyme and any other chronic stuff.
Yeah, or even look at, I'm not going to get into the vaccines, but we did a little study at our office. We checked natural killer cell function in people vaccinated. Just every time they got vaccinated, lowers. Now they're showing that the more times you're vaccinated, the more likely you're going to get COVID. But and so it's all this dogma, very financially about what I'll try to avoid that, but it's hard. But let's see, where were we? With Lyme, and we find the fundamental commonality of all these conditions really is this immune dysfunction. And like, we don't even think twice about POTS patients, because you fix their immune system, that goes away. Mast cell activation dramatically reduced, and KPV. And normally people say, well, even like, all endocrinologists and doctors and internists, they think like immune systems on or off. No. And so like biologics will lower cortisone, cortisol will lower the immune system, both sides. We want to not do that. You want to modulate. You want to lower that Th2 and raise that Th1, which really right there anti-aged you probably 10 years,
It's amazing stuff when you can think about just rebalancing and modulating. I mean, I think I use the word immune modulation like every day, like 100 times.
I know, it's like people are like, oh my God, he's doing that again.
Well, yeah, and it's like, it's the balance beam. It's also like the bringing the roof down but not too much, and not lifting it up. Because I think a lot of what I was taught in modern medicine, like just conventional medicine, is we suppress the immune system or we jack it way up.
Yeah.
Like, what about just put it in its own sweet spot?
Yeah.
So
Again, it's not on or off. It's like you want to modulate, or you're lowering this or both, and that's where, all these biological people get increased cancer, increased infections, and because you're lowering both. And like, for instance, KPV, which lowers mast cell inflammation, lowers Th2, and it improves your immunity. And it's shown it's also very antimicrobial, but you get an improved response to all these infections. And with low Th1, you can't convert IgM antibodies to IgG. So we'll find, like, we get these patients that have IgM positive, and the infectious disease says, well, no, you've had these in for 10 years. This is a false positive. No, watch, when you modulate their immune system and increase that Th1, now they convert IgM, which is an antibody that's kind of just holds on and just like a dog on your leg, whatever, in your genes. But IgG activates complement, will basically explode that organism. And like, for instance, so I had a 41 kilodalton band on IgM. That was it. When I started, then I modulated my immune system and also little antibiotics. And all of a sudden I got, I did have 0 bands on IgG. I got 7 bands on IgG.
Wow. I had like every band positive on IgM 8 years later.
Oh, really? After you're better?
No. I got 10 days of treatment and I was very sick. So I got acute Lyme, I got 10 days of doxy, and they missed the babesia that they also found 8 years later. And I think
Were you sick all this time?
Hmm?
Were you sick all this time?
Oh yeah, I was sick for like 13 years. But the good news is I've been well for 12 without a symptom. So I can tell you, you definitely, when you modulate your immune system properly and you kill the stuff, and then you work on the mindset like you had talked about earlier, you can definitely get better. But yeah, it's brutal, right? And it's like, but I had like this Christmas tree IgM, and then the IgG, I think at 4 or 5, I'd have to go back and pull I don't usually go back and look at my old stories because I let go of them. But it's interesting to think, like, guys, like, so Lyme comes in. Yeah, I just want to make sure that I understood what you said correctly. Lyme comes in, and as it infects you, it suppresses Th1. Th1 is essentially part of the thing responsible for helping IgM go to IgG and have the proper full healing and clearing response. And then also allows you to have the blessing that says ID now says that you have Lyme because you have an IgM and became an IgG, even though Alcott showed that doesn't almost ever happen.
They don't believe in chronic Lyme.
Well, right.
It's crazy. There's thousands of studies,
Right, I agree. So it's interesting. So it's like what we need to do is, in order to even finish the infective process, almost is what I'm hearing, is like for your body's immune system to go through the complete course and like turn it on and turn it off, you need to have this Th1 balance here that Lyme automatically suppresses. So what are the things?
Or just real quick. So for instance, I had 3.5 years of the highest dose IV antibiotics, like 7 at a time at 3, 4, 5 times a dose. I would never give it to a patient, but I had to get better. Didn't get any better with 3.5 years of doing that every day, And I remember I went in with sepsis all the time. And I remember the nurse outside, there did shift change. He's like, oh, this is that HIV, the AIDS patient that keeps turning up negative for HIV. Like, she was pissed, and so no, I had my natural killer cell function was 0. Like, no wonder I couldn't clear anything. So antibiotics will lower the infection. Then your body's got to take over. But if your body can't take over, you can't lower it enough.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do we do? Like, what are some of the core peptides?
Oh, we got to go.
Yeah. So we were going to tell you all about what peptides you should use, but tonight we can.
Stay tuned. Yeah.
Stay tuned. Yeah. I also want to say thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart to the extraordinary guest speakers that we have. And of course, Without the support of our sponsors, we wouldn't even be able to have this summit and make it a reality. So I wanted to say thank you very much to the Energy Blueprint, EcoNugenics, Igenix Labs, Dr. Bill Pollock, Primal Life Organics, Biocide and Botanicals, The Bone Coach, Integrated Peptides, and C60 Purple Power. These are our amazing sponsors who truly have made this event possible. Hey everyone, Dr. Tom back here with you for this episode of the Healing from Lyme Disease